My name is John. I'm our lead pastor, and I get to preach almost every week. But on the weeks when I don't preach, I hear it gets even better. So that is a really, really, really good thing. We've been in a series for almost the entirety of time in the book of Acts. We started it in April, and the way we teach at Mission is we teach in series, and sometimes those are really long, sometimes they're really short. Sometimes they're through an entire book of the Bible, sometimes they're not. But we've been in a series, a really long one, through the book of Acts. Started in April, and today is the very, very last day of this teaching series. So some of you maybe caught some of it, some of you caught all of it. Next Sunday, we're starting a brand new 4-week teaching series to prepare us for Advent. What we're gonna name that is He Will Be Called. I'm gonna be preaching for 4 weeks out of Isaiah 9:6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor. That's next week. Mighty God, that's the week after that. Everlasting Father, the week after that. And then the week before Christmas, Prince of Peace. So that is going to begin next Sunday. Last Sunday was a sermon titled The Long Dark In Between. And I was visiting my nephew at his college, the University of Georgia, Go Dogs, and I was there with him being a good uncle, and I watched the service online on Facebook Live, like a lot of you are watching right now. And what I watched was one of the most impactful sermons I think I've heard, and it was not given by me, it was given by Dan Ruda, and I think it'd be important for us to thank him publicly. He's sitting right over there, second row. Good job, Dan. It's great. He did such a good job. I think you should preach next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, the Sunday after that. I'm going to be in Jamaica. All right, so great job on that. The Long Dark In Between. That is followed by the title of this sermon today to finish up our study of Acts. Rome at Last. Say that with me. Rome at Last. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in Acts 27 and 28. If you're unfamiliar with Acts, it's a book in the Bible, in the New Testament. So if you open up and you hit Psalm, just keep going right. If you hit Revelation, you missed it. Acts is what you're looking for. If you don't have a Bible, no big deal. We can help you with that. You can get there on our church app. All right, so just open up our church app. We're going to have all the notes for you there in our church app. So what we've been doing is we've been walking through Acts. What that is it's not a body spray. But it is an account of the early church. And it's been something that's been really incredible for us to look at since April. So today is a very, very final part that we're going to look at, the last two chapters, Acts 27 and 28. So if you're there, we're going to start in Acts 27, verse 1. It says this: when it was decided that we would sail for Italy. Let me hit pause. Show of hands, how many of you are Italian? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Yeah, most. There's a question you're supposed to ask me, but you missed it. Forget about it. We'll do that next week. A lot of our church is Italian. I knew you would like this part. So let me just give us a little context. This began in chapter 1. That would make sense, right? All the way back. So let's go all the way back. Hit rewind to chapter 1, Acts 1. Remember verse 8. It's really the theme verse of all of Acts. I asked you to keep one foot in Acts 1:8 as we continued with the other foot to get all the way through the book of Acts. And so when we go all the way back to Acts 1:8, what we see is Jesus, right before liftoff, he says to his disciples, says, all right, and you will be my witnesses. You're going to tell the world who I am and what I've been doing. You're going to be my witnesses. And you're going to be my witnesses not just where you're comfortable here in Jerusalem, but it's going to go beyond that. You're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, even Samaria, and then is added, and even to the ends of the earth. What's interesting is a lot of scholars would say that ends of the earth was understood by a first century Jew as Rome. And so when Jesus says, Acts 1:8, here's where the gospel's going, man, it is going to cover the entire Roman Empire, they were like, that's impossible. And Jesus says, I know, and I just raised from the dead. That's what I specialize in. He says, this is what we're going to do. You're going to be my witnesses everywhere. And so here's what we get. We've been taking ground. We see it happening in Jerusalem. Then it begins to move out from there, Judea, Samaria. Then here we get all the way to chapter 27. And what we see in chapter 27 is Paul, he had made it kind of from Jerusalem to Caesarea. In the 20s of Acts, a lot of that is the long dark in between. Paul is on trial for all kinds of different things. And then on trial with King Agrippa, what Paul asks him is, I want to appeal to Caesar. Paul says, I want to stand before Nero himself. And Paul is granted his wish. And this is what we see in chapter 27. That kind of court date is over with. Paul and his guys, they are on their way to Rome. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. It says this, we boarded a ship. Say that with me. We boarded a ship. Now, this is the second time. If you're following, you kind of look for repeated words in here. This is a great way to study the Bible. We, that's the second time it's come up. We, a first person plural. Some of you took English once, right? This is an important thing. We've been in Acts for a long time. When did this we thing start? Hold on a second, Luke, who's writing this, he's like in the story. He's like, we, right? This is interesting. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, there's Luke. He's right there in the mix. He continues, right? We boarded a ship. From where? Say this city with me. From? I just wanted to hear you mispronounce it. All right, I can't pronounce it either. About to sail from ports along the coast of the province of Asia. Look at this next part. And say it with me, and... Guys, come on. And we put out to sea. Look at this next name. Aristarchus. Some of you are pregnant. You're about to have a son. You've been looking and asking God, would you give me a name? There it is right there. And we shall name him Aristarchus. A Macedonian from Thessalonica was with us. So we see this kind of second to last chapter. It's not just Paul. It's the power of we. Luke is there, Aristarchus is there, and there is Paul. My first observation for today is actually an old African proverb. It's this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, you probably won't make it out of Jerusalem. If you want to get to Rome, go together. It is the power of we. This is actually what we see all throughout the Bible. Look at some of the heroes of our faith. Look at how they reached their Rome. Sometimes that's geographically, a lot of times it isn't. It's fulfilling and stepping into the place God has called them. This is what we see over and over again all throughout the Bible. Some of the heroes of our faith, we see the power of we. Just think about Larry, all right? It wasn't just Larry, but it was Larry, Moe, and Curly, right? That's not in the Bible. I'm just making sure you're awake. Moses, think about Moses. It wasn't just Moses, right? Moses was not Moses without Aaron and Miriam. How about David? David was not David without Jonathan and Nathan. How about Ruth? Ruth was not Ruth without Naomi. And in Acts 27, Paul is not Paul without Luke and Aristarchus. It's the power of we. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. What is striking to me, and you can read it in your own time, all of chapter 27. I recommend that you do. It's no longer boring at all. It's one of the most incredible stories you'll read in all the Bible from an adventure standpoint. They board this ship, and there's over 200 of them on this ship. Back in the day, this was not like a Disney cruise. All right, this was highly dangerous. They get on this ship, and Paul and his two buddies are there with him. We find out there's an interesting detail that a lot of the guys on the ship were prisoners. Now, I want you to imagine, just for a second, what this experience was like for Luke or Big A, all right, Aristarchus. It's okay. All right, it's a really hard name to pronounce. Did God call them to Rome? No, I don't know. I haven't really looked into it, but I don't think he did. God called Paul to Rome, yet here's what's interesting. We see them say, all right, I'm going to go with you. Count on me. I'm going to saddle up with you. I'm going to step onto this ship with you. And when you read chapter 27, you find that it was no pleasure cruise. It was crazy. The wind picked up. In fact, they became shipwrecked. They then make their way to an island named Malta. And Paul, when you think it would get better, he's trying to fix breakfast. He reaches in to kind of spread the coals on, gets bit by a viper. I mean, things just go from bad to worse. Yet he is not alone. God is with them, and also the two God has put around them. One of the things that has kind of come from the text is me asking this question: do I have a Luke and an Aristarchus? I know what God has called me to. And some of you have an idea of some of the visions God has put on your life. You know what your Rome is. The question is, do you have a Luke? Do you have an Aristarchus? It's amazing to see the faith of Paul in the storm. And I believe to my core, in part, just like a lot of the other heroes of our faith, it's because the power of God and the power of we. Who is your Luke? Who is your Aristarchus? Back in September, we did a teaching series that changed your life forever. The amount of mail we've gotten, mail. It's almost a little obnoxious how much response. It was called Because God Is, We Are. You've already forgotten about it, I know. And it was about missional communities. There's a lot of new folks at our church, and you've asked, hey, what do you do besides Sunday? And we're like, not that much. We do a growth track, and it's 4 steps to aim you to really live out the Great Commission. We explain what that is. In essence, we want you one day to be in a missional community. All right? And then what I did is I put a filing cabinet on stage. Anyone? No one remembered that either? Okay, thank you, Kelly. That's my wife. Means a lot. So I had 3 folders within that filing cabinet, 3 folders, and there was 3 names on it to help us understand what a missional community is. I'm going to help you. I'll tell you two of the 3 folders' names. One name was missionary, another one was servant. Anyone know what the third name was on it? Yeah, it was family. Family. This is the definition. It's a family of missionary servants. And maybe it's just because I think constantly about missional communities that I have the lens to see Acts 27 through. But we would be totally missing it to not see it through the lens of missional communities. Paul, what is he doing? This is what he's doing. Right here, Acts 27, it is a family of missionary servants. Paul is not on his own. No, he's got a family. He's on mission. Where is he heading? That mission is leading him to Rome to serve those he is sent to. Because missional communities is a foreign concept to most American Christians, we're going to keep talking about it. We're not pulling off the gas. In fact, we're creating more resources to help everyone understand it. For the past 3 months, me, Tommy, and Dan, sitting right over there, we've created a little podcast. We only work on Sundays, and we've been looking at what could we do during the week. It's true. And so what we do during the week is we drink a lot of coffee, and we put a little microphone in the table, because this is what we talk about a lot. And I said, hey, let's just start capturing our conversation about missional communities. I think it could help our people a whole lot. And so we just released this podcast last week. It's called Taking Flight, and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's pretty humorous. It's really fun. It's really kind of laid back, untucked. But it's us talking about missional communities. So go there. Check that out. I think it'll be really helpful for you. Now, why do I bring this up? In this first observation, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Here's why I think this is important right now in the life of our church. We're in the final days of doing church as we know it here in this location. Yeah, that's right. We're getting ready to move to 82 Stratford Drive. It's a future home of Mission Church. This is exciting, very exciting. Some of you have seen it. Soon, all of you are going to see it. But I want you to be really clear on one thing. 82 Stratford Drive is not our Rome. It's a tool we believe God's going to use to move us towards it. We've been saying since we started the church that we started this church to experience revival. Sometimes we say awakening. Now what we say is to experience a movement of Jesus in the tent in our lifetime. That's our Rome. That's where we're going. And so when you step foot in this new building, I don't want you to fall in love with the building, and it's going to be great. What I am asking, what I am hoping is that together we will say, we're not there yet. All right? The thing you used to say to your kids on the road trip, no, we're not there yet. When you study the early church, you see that one of the greatest things that happened that spread from all the way to Jerusalem to Rome, one of the things that helped them get from Jerusalem to Rome was the ancient Roman road system. There was nothing accidental about the time in which this movement happened. Nothing accidental about it at all. God, in this moment in history, said, now we can go. I got this road system. But what you'll never find is any accounts in the history of the church where they would bow down and worship the road. You'll never find Paul saying, I love this road. Look at it. It's the best road I've ever seen. And in the same way, we're going to get to this building, and it is going to be great, but we're not going to worship the building. It's simply a road. It's a tool. And we believe it is a road, and it is a tool that's going to help more and more of our friends find and follow Jesus, and at the same time, hear about a kind of Rome that's bigger than themselves. If you want to go fast, all right, you're barely going to get out of Jerusalem. If you want to go far, you need to go together. Do you have a Luke and Aristarchus? Look there in chapter 28. Chapter 28, verse 14. I believe Luke has been waiting for this verse since we started our journey in the book of Acts. He's been excited, man. He's like, man, I cannot wait to write this verse. And here it is, verse 14. And so we came to Rome. At last. Now, Paul, can you just relax for a little bit? And so we came to Rome. Pretty incredible. And I think it's important to note that there is a we in there and not an I. And so we came to Rome. Skip down to verse 30. It says this, for 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house. Some of you asked me, John, what's more biblical? Should I buy, should I rent? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just saying right here. You can make the Bible say anything that you want. No, I read it. That's what Paul did. He was a renter. For 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house and welcomed all who came in. Now, there's a lot of detail around this that we find in some of Paul's writings, not Luke's writings. We can misunderstand this picture. We can be like, dude's in Rome. It's amazing. Have you ever had pasta in Rome? Oh my gosh, the Merlot? Oh, or the Sangiovese? It's amazing. It's unbelievable. I mean, he's got a pretty good gig going on in Rome, right? I mean, this is amazing. But that's actually not what's going on in Rome. He's under house arrest. Yeah. He's actually chained. Ooh, yeah. He's chained. In fact, this is how Paul writes about it. You can read about it in Ephesians chapter 6. He says, I'm an ambassador in chains. So he gives other detail in some of his writings about what this was like. Why do I bring this up? Here's why I bring this up. The second observation. God is not limited by our limitations. God is not limited by your limitations. One of the things we all have in common is that limitations. God is not limited by them. What a picture. Imagine this, Paul in chains, changing Rome. Paul had in his mind for a long time, you can read about it in Romans chapter 1. He'd been telling the Christians in Rome, I can't wait to get you. I'm trying, I just can't get there. Keep getting blocked. He'd been wanting to get there, and Paul had in his mind, I can see the day when I am there in Rome as a missionary, but what he didn't see is the day when he would arrive in Rome as a prisoner, chained, under house arrest. But was not chained, when we look at this, when we understand what wasn't chained in Rome was God. What wasn't restricted and held captive in Rome was the power of the gospel. Yeah, Paul was in chains, but God wasn't. Yes, Paul was being restricted, but not for a second was God. Yes, Paul was held back. He was chained. He was under this kind of eye, but God wasn't. Paul was chained, but God wasn't. Why? God is not limited by your limitations. Amen. One of the most important things in my belief, in my faith, is that God is sovereign. The sovereignty of God. It's something I should probably teach on more than I have. But God is sovereign. Instead of teaching a sermon on it right now, I'm just going to give you an understanding of the way that I understand it. There is not one thing that will ever touch my life that has not first been sifted through the hands of a sovereign God. I want you to think about that. This is the way that I live. This is the way that I see things. And I don't see it perfectly. Sometimes I get off course and I lose sight of this. There is nothing that will touch my life or the life of my family that has not first been sifted through the hands of my sovereign God. Doesn't mean that he wanted it. A lot of times it means that he's allowed it and he can use it to further his kingdom. God is sovereign. Paul was bound, but God wasn't. In what ways do you feel chained right now? In what ways do you feel limited? And they're very real things. Some of you would say, John, I've got a mobility limitation. Now, this is mainly to some young moms. You haven't named it that. And now I've just given you a really good name for it. You're like, yeah, I didn't know what to call it. Like, I'm tethered to this infant. I mean, I can't go anywhere, right? I remember when Kelly was in this stage with our 2 girls. She's like, John, the highlight of my week is if I can have one adult conversation. That's all I need, right? Some of you would say, John, I'd love to do great things for God, but I can't even leave the house. You have a mobility limitation. Some of you say, John, I'd love to do great things for God. I really think the gospel could move in and through my life, but this financial thing, you have a financial limitation. Some of you, it's a physical limitation, I came across a book that I want to recommend for you. It's called Hope Heals by Jane Catherine Wolfe. Such a powerful book. In fact, last weekend, the 2 of them spoke at North Point Community Church. If you follow their podcast, I'd recommend that you listen to it. Kelly shared it with me, and I listened to it yesterday and just driving down the road crying. So powerful about this woman who had this stroke at age 26. She was a model doing all kinds of things in LA, and everything changed in just a moment. Some of you have very real physical limitations. I'm not standing up here saying, oh, that's not a limitation. No, it is a limitation. What I am saying is God is not limited, though, by it. I think Hope Heals could be a resource for you. Some of you would say it's a mental limitation. Whatever it might be, maybe you struggle to learn. School is hard for you. It was for me, right? Some of you would say, yeah, John, this dyslexia thing, I'd love to lead and have impact, but this dyslexia thing, I just want to ask you to do the research. Some of the greatest leaders in the world have dyslexia. Kind of an interesting thing. God's not limited by your limitations. How about an experience limitation? Some of our youth, our students feel that. They say, yeah, I'm going to do great things for God once I have a mortgage. Right? Like once I grow up and really know like stuff. Yet God tends to use young people to change the world. I want you to think about this. Man, this hit me so hard this week in my research. While chained in Rome, Paul wrote the books, Colossians, Philemon. That was just, that wasn't a huge work, but still is good. It's a Bible joke if you read the Bible. Ephesians, and Philippians. He wrote these books under house arrest, chained. And yet I complain writing one sermon when the Wi-Fi is slow. Right? I was finishing this on a plane this week. I'm like, I can't even preach this Wi-Fi. Right? Paid $100, get Wi-Fi for 20 seconds on this flight, and it's not even working. I can't even write a sermon if the Wi-Fi isn't good. And yet here is Paul, chained under house arrest, writing some of the most important books that you'll ever read that can change your life. Some of the limitations of the heroes of our faith. Moses, it was a speech impediment. David, it was his size. Rahab, it was her sexual past. Some of you that are coming to Mission, we say all the time, it doesn't matter what you did last year or last night because of people like Rahab. We look at Rahab and say, man, if God could do something great with her life, who's to say God can't do something great with your life? Quit cropping God out of the story he wants to write and can write in and through you. You're not limited by your past. You may be held captive still by your past, but God can redeem that. For Mary, we're getting ready to celebrate Christmas. It was her age. For John and Peter, it was their lack of education. This is why chapter 4 of Acts is Tommy and I's favorite chapter in all the Bible. It gives us hope, right? Ordinary, unschooled, but they'd been with Jesus. God's been teaching me a lot about that one. For Paul in Rome, it was his chains, yet the gospel was not chained. This has given me a lot of hope. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. God is not limited by your limitations. That is such good news. And now I want us to look at the third and final observation. It's interesting. I've been studying Acts all year. I've looked at it before, but I've been like deep dive, so I could have something to say up here that would be helpful all year. And I've been looking forward to the last verse. I've been looking forward to what I call the big finish, okay? So I'm just like, I don't know how it's going to finish, but it's going to be, have you been reading the other verses of Acts? Like holy handkerchiefs, people like looking at it and getting, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Guy falling out of a window because the preacher went too long, but got raised from the dead, all right? Just like crazy, awesome stuff. And I'm like, there's no telling then what the last verses, if that's been the earlier verses, this last verse, it is going to be like, back the chair up. Did you just hear that kind of verse? This finish, Luke has been storing up. Luke has been saying, you just wait till I get to the final verse of Acts. And here it is. He proclaimed the kingdom of God and taught about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. That's it. Hey, Luke, not sure what's going on here? Maybe it's a hand cramp. What else? What else? Luke, what happened to Paul? Look, we've been waiting for you guys to get to Rome. Tell us something. What's going on in Rome? Who'd you meet? Who'd you do dinner with? What's going on? Give me something. Luke, you are so detailed. The physician, we read your gospel, we're like, oh my gosh, now I can see. We get to this last verse, and this is the finish. Why? Here's why. Final observation. Luke is done writing, but God isn't. Luke is done writing, but God isn't. Scholars call Acts the great unfinished story. I like that. The great unfinished story. I came across a story I'd never heard of before. It's of the world-renowned composer Puccini. There's been an Italian theme really to this whole message, so I thought I would just kind of, finish strong here. Puccini, some of you have heard of him, he's one of the greatest composers of all time. Wrote all kinds of awesome operas. And in which is generally, I get an oxymoron, awesome opera, but sometimes they do go together. He was amazing, world-renowned, but in 1922, he was diagnosed with cancer. It was in 1922 that he was working on what he believed was going to be his greatest opera of all time, yet cancer came. And cancer, a couple years after that, in 1924, ended up taking his life. The great composer Puccini died. And in many ways, people were so sad, one, because he was gone, but also because that great opera that everyone was getting excited for never got finished. It was this unfinished work. A couple years go by after that, and in 1926, his students, they rounded up a bunch of people, and they got people into this theater in Milan, and they said, "We want to play for you what we had been working on." And so the place was filled. And the way the story goes is the man that was then holding the baton, the new composer, had been one of his students for a long time. And so he is leading this orchestra, and this whole thing is happening. This opera is amazing. I mean, it's just incredible. And it gets to the point in the music where this long disciple of this amazing composer, Puccini, he just puts down the baton, and tears start to flow. And he then turns to the audience, and he says, it's at this point that Puccini died. The place was silent. After some moments went by, a huge smile covered this guy's face, and he grabbed the baton and he picked it out and he said to the audience, but his disciples finished his work and they continued to play. People ask me, "John, how many chapters are there in Acts?" And I say 29. And they're like, "I knew it. I knew this guy didn't know his Bible. I knew it. Been saying it for years." I said, "No, there's 29. "Well, John, I'm going to show you right here. There's 28. I'm like, "Well, I know there's 28. But maybe you haven't read Acts before. Because if you read Acts before, and you understand the way that God inspires Luke to finish, you understand that, oh yeah, Luke is done, but God isn't. That you and I, in fact, embody chapter 29. That you and I, the way that we love, the way that we live, the way that we make disciples who make disciples, the way that we love our kids, the way that we push darkness away by the kingdom of light, that is chapter 29. And some of your friends, they may never open a Bible, but they are coming close every single day to chapter 29 of Acts. The question is, what are they reading? Is the power of God being diminished in chapter 29? Is the fame of Jesus being forgotten in chapter 29? Are we making it about our name in chapter 29? Is it really about the celebrity pastor in chapter 29? What are they reading? And what we're seeing around the country right now is God is moving in a unique way in this moment in time. In many ways, chapter 29 right now in 2018 is becoming one of the most incredible chapters this world has ever looked at. In our church, when people come close to chapter 29, they're seeing marriages be restored. Marriages that were on the rocks, marriages that said there's no chance for them. When people come close to chapter 29 in our church, they're seeing people make the Great Commission great again. They're seeing people say, you know what, in the workplace it's important, but I got a new bottom line. When people come close to chapter 29, they're saying, now that is a mom and dad who are raising their kids, but more than that, they're making disciples right there in their home. Almost every single day, my neighbors read chapter 29. Every time they do, the only thing I want is for them to come face to face with one name, and it's definitely not my name. It's the name of Jesus. If chapter 29 says anything, I want it to say Jesus. I want it to say that there's one name that brings hope. There's one name that brings healing. There's one name that brings restoration, and it is not my name and it is not yours. It is the name of Jesus. Luke is done writing, but God isn't. If you'd stand to your feet, let me pray for us. God, thank you. Your word is alive. It just is. And you're alive in us. And God, what I'm asking for and what we're asking for are the Christians right now that are here or watching online. Just join me in belief right now. God, what we're believing for is that this portion of chapter 29, 2019, that there would actually be another great awakening. I'm not and cannot and will not shrink the vision. You want to see this, God. We call it a movement of Jesus. We don't want to have to wait until 50 years from now. Right now, God, do it. Pour yourself out on us as you did for them. God, when our friends read chapter 29 this week and in the coming weeks around the Christmas season, Holy Spirit of God, move in such a way that you take their breath away. We love you and we praise you. And all God's people agreed and said,